I know you've always wondered what hospitals look like during night shifts, where medicine meets science. Those of us who work night shifts know the truth better. We usually keep what happens in hospitals after a certain hour of the night to ourselves. Because that's how it should be, and these things aren't in medical textbooks. What I'm going to tell you tonight will make you question everything you thought you knew about the boundaries between life and death. 3 healthcare workers, 3 different wards, 3 encounters. If all 3 of these happened to you in the middle of the night, you might feel a little uneasy. These encounters led them to question the nature of reality. But what's truly unsettling is that none of these experiences were random. They only appeared to be coincidences. Each one occurred for a reason deeper than a simple coincidence. Story 1. The Extra Patient. Before I share this last story, I need to make something clear. I've never been one to believe in supernatural nonsense. I'm a practical person, grounded in science and logic. What I'm about to tell you challenges everything I thought I knew about reality, and honestly, I'm still not sure I believe it myself. At night, I keep thinking to myself, was what I experienced real? I think it was. I'm Jessica, and I work as a charge nurse at Mercy General Hospital here in Seattle. I've been in healthcare for 15 years, and I've seen just about everything you'd expect in a busy urban medical center. But this particular incident happened on what should have been just another routine evening shift. It was a Tuesday in March, around 6:30 p.m., and we were in the middle of dinner service on the medical surgical ward. Our system is pretty straightforward. Dietary sends up exactly the number of meal trays corresponding to our current patient census. If we have 12 patients, we get 12 trays. No more, no less. It's been that way for as long as I've worked here, and mistakes are incredibly rare. That evening, we only had 7 patients on our unit, which was unusually quiet for us. I was working with my colleague Amanda, and we'd just received our 7 dinner trays from the kitchen, each one labeled with the correct room and bed number. I took the west wing, while Amanda handled the east side. My section had 3 rooms to cover, 314 with 2 patients, 316 with 1 patient in bed, and 318, which was supposed to be empty, according to our assignment board. I started with 314, chatting with Mrs. Rodriguez in bed, while I helped her set up her tray. Then moved to Mr. Patterson in bed, B. Both patients were recovering from routine surgeries and in good spirits. Next I headed to 316 to check on Ms. Williams, an elderly woman who'd been admitted for pneumonia monitoring. That's when I decided to pop my head into 318, just to double check that it was indeed empty as scheduled. The room had 2 beds. Bed A was clearly unoccupied, sheets pulled tight, pillows fluffed, the way housekeeping leaves them. But in bed B, by the window, sat a middle-aged man in a hospital gown, reading a paperback novel. He looked up when I entered and smiled pleasantly. "Good evening, nurse. I was wondering when dinner might arrive." I was confused, but tried not to show it. "I'm so sorry," I said. "There seems to be some kind of mix-up with our meal count. Let me check our records and get you sorted out right away." He nodded, understanding. "No worries at all. These things happen." I hurried back to the nurse's station and immediately checked our census board. Room 318 was listed as vacant. I pulled up the electronic records on my computer. No admissions to that room in the past 48 hours. "Amanda," I called to my colleague, "do you know anything about a patient in 318B? Middle-aged guy, maybe late 50s, brown hair." She looked up from her charting. 318. "That room's been empty since Sunday when Mr. Chen was discharged." "That's what I thought, but there's definitely someone in there. He's asking about dinner." Amanda frowned. "That's weird. Maybe it's a late admission that didn't get entered into the system yet. It happens sometimes with transfers from other units." Despite feeling increasingly puzzled, I grabbed an extra meal tray from our emergency stock and headed back to 318. The idea of a patient going without dinner, regardless of paperwork issues, didn't sit right with me. When I entered the room, bed B was empty. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at the perfectly made bed. The covers were smooth, the pillows arranged exactly as housekeeping had left them. No sign that anyone had been sitting there moments before. I checked the bathroom door open, lights off, clearly unoccupied. I even looked under the bed and in the small closet, feeling ridiculous, but needing to be thorough. "Excuse me," came a voice from bed. "Hey." I spun around to see Mrs. Rodriguez from 314 standing in the doorway. "I was taking a walk, and couldn't help but notice. Are you looking for something? Did you see a man in this room when you walked by? In bed B?" She shook her head slowly. "No, honey. This room's been empty since I got here yesterday. I would have noticed if someone was in here. These walls are pretty thin." My heart started racing. I was absolutely certain I'd seen someone. I could still remember his face, clearly kind eyes, graying hair, the way he'd smiled when he looked up from his book. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and headed back to the nurse's station, the extra meal tray still in my hands. "Any luck solving the mystery?" Amanda asked. "He's not there anymore," I said carefully. "The room's empty." Amanda raised an eyebrow. Maybe he went for a walk, or stepped out to make a phone call. But I knew that wasn't right. The bed had been perfectly made, as if no one had ever been in it. Over the next few hours, I kept finding excuses to walk past 318. Each time, the room remained exactly the same, vacant, sterile, waiting for the next admission. At the end of my shift, I mentioned the incident to our night supervisor, hoping she might have some explanation. Instead of looking skeptical, she nodded thoughtfully. "Room 318, she mused. "You know, that's interesting. We've had a couple of similar reports about that room over the years. Nothing dramatic, just people seeing patients who weren't really there." She explained that the room had a bit of an unusual history. A few years back, a patient named Robert Hamilton had spent his final weeks there while battling cancer. He'd been well liked by the staff, always grateful, never complained. Spent most of his time reading books that his daughter brought him. He passed away peacefully on a Tuesday evening, she continued. The nurses said he was reading right up until the end. Sweet man. My blood ran cold. Tuesday evening. What did he look like? Oh, probably late 50s, brown hair, always had a book in his hands. I felt the room spin slightly. The description matched exactly what I'd seen. The thing is, the supervisor continued, some of the staff think Robert never really left. Not in any scary way, he was too gentle for that. But sometimes, when the room's empty, people report seeing someone sitting by the window, usually reading. Always polite, always grateful. She looked at me seriously. Did whoever you saw seem threatening at all? I shook my head. No, he was actually very pleasant. Just ... normal. That sounds like Robert, she said with a small smile. If you see him again, don't worry. He's not here to cause trouble. Maybe he just doesn't realize it's time to go. I never did see the man in 318 again, though I always glanced in when I passed by. But knowing Robert's story somehow made the experience less unsettling and more sad, in a way. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there, sitting by that window with a good book, patiently waiting for dinner that will never come. Part of me hopes he's found whatever he was looking for, and moved on to wherever souls go when they're finally ready. But another part of me thinks maybe he's exactly where he wants to be, in a place where people cared about him, where he spent his final peaceful days, where nurses still check on him, even though he doesn't need medical care anymore. Some patients, I've learned, never really check out. Perhaps I am one of them. Story 2. The Final Ward. In 2022, I was working the night shift in pediatric emergency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, when something happened that still keeps me awake sometimes. I'm Marcus, and I've been a pediatric nurse for 12 years. I've seen kids fight battles that would break most adults. But this story isn't about courage or medical miracles, it's about something much harder to explain. It was late October, around 10 p.m., when the ambulance brought in 6-year-old Tyler Brooks. His parents had rushed him to the ER after he'd suddenly spiked a high fever and started having trouble breathing. What began as what looked like a common cold had escalated rapidly into something much more serious. By the time they reached us, Tyler was in respiratory distress. We immediately started him on oxygen and began running tests to figure out what we were dealing with. His parents, Linda and David, never left his bedside. You could see the terror in their eyes as they watched their little boy struggle to breathe. We managed to stabilize him, but his condition remained critical. The lab work came back inconclusive, which left our attending physician, Dr. Sarah Kim, puzzled. It wasn't bacterial, wasn't viral in any pattern we recognized, and none of the standard treatments were making a significant difference. Tyler's parents took turns staying with him around the clock. On the second night, exhaustion finally got the better of them, and I convinced them to go home for a few hours to shower and rest. They were reluctant to leave, but Tyler seemed stable, and I promised to call immediately if anything changed. Around 2 a.m., I was doing my hourly check when I found Tyler awake in his bed. He was still on oxygen, but his eyes were alert, and he was trying to talk around the mask. I leaned in close to hear him. He kept mentioning someone named Emma. At first, I thought he might be talking about a friend, or maybe a sister I hadn't heard about. When I asked him who Emma was, he just smiled and pointed toward the corner of the room. I looked where he was pointing, but saw nothing except medical equipment and the guest chair his parents had been using. "Is Emma here with you?" I asked gently. Tyler nodded enthusiastically and started trying to tell me something else, but his voice was too weak to make out clearly. That's when his monitors started alarming. His oxygen levels dropped suddenly, and he went into cardiac arrest without any warning. I immediately called a code blue and started CPR while the rest of the team rushed in. We worked on him for 27 minutes. Dr. Kim tried everything: medications, defibrillation, advanced airway management. But sometimes, despite everything modern medicine can offer, it's just not enough. Tyler died at 2:43 a.m. on October 29, 2022. I had to make the hardest phone call of my career, asking his parents to come back to the hospital immediately, without being able to explain why over the phone. They arrived within 30 minutes, still holding on to hope until they saw our faces. The sound of Linda's grief when Dr. Kim told them what had happened will stay with me forever. David just held her while she sobbed, his own tears falling silently. After the family had some private time with Tyler and the necessary procedures were completed, I went home and hugged my own children, a little tighter than usual. Tyler's case haunted me for weeks. He'd been so young, so full of life, despite being sick. And his final moments, talking about Emma whoever she was, stayed with me. About 6 months later, I was working a day shift when I saw a familiar couple walking through the pediatric ward. It took me a moment to recognize Linda and David Brooks, without the exhaustion and terror that had marked their faces the last time I'd seen them. Linda was carrying a newborn baby. They recognized me immediately and came over to say hello. Linda's face lit up when she saw me. "Marcus, I was hoping we might run into you." She introduced the baby in her arms. "This is Emma. She's 3 weeks old." The moment she said the name, I felt like the world had tilted. Emma. The name Tyler had been repeating in his final hour. "Emma," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's a beautiful name. Had you chosen it already, before?" David shook his head. "Actually, no. We hadn't even known we were having a girl until after. Well, until after Tyler passed. Linda found out she was pregnant about a month later." Linda nodded, bouncing Emma gently. "We never even considered the name Emma before. But when she was born, David looked at her and said, 'She looks like an Emma,' and somehow we both just knew that was right." I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. "Tyler mentioned that name," I said carefully, "in his final hour. He kept talking about Emma." Both parents went very still. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were something else entirely. "He knew," she whispered. "Somehow, he knew about his little sister before we did." David put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "The doctors told us it was impossible for Linda to have gotten pregnant when she did, given the timing and ... other factors. But here Emma is." Looking down at the sleeping baby, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since that awful night. Maybe Tyler's spirit had lingered just long enough to see the sister who would help his parents heal. Maybe he'd been talking to Emma's soul, welcoming her into the world, even as he was preparing to leave it. I don't have scientific explanations for how a dying 6-year-old could know about a sister who hadn't even been conceived yet. But standing there with his parents and baby Emma, I didn't need scientific explanations. Some things transcend medicine, transcend logic, transcend death itself. Tyler's story taught me that love doesn't follow the rules we think govern reality. It reaches across time, across the boundaries between life and death, connecting souls in ways that comfort the living and guide the dying. Every time I see a family going through the unthinkable loss of a child, I remember Tyler and Emma. I remember that sometimes, even in our darkest moments, there are forces at work that we can't see or understand, forces that ensure love finds a way to endure. If you are still here now, it means you have experienced something that cannot be easily explained by coincidence or imagination. 3 different hospitals, 3 different healthcare professionals, 3 encounters that question everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between life and death. What you need to understand here is not whether these stories are true, but whether you are ready to accept that our understanding of reality may be far more limited than we are willing to admit. Because in the quiet corridors of hospitals around the world, in places where hope and despair walk hand in hand, the impossible happens every day. Story 3. The Night Shift Visitor. Last winter, something happened to me that completely shattered my understanding of what's possible in this world. I'm Sarah, and I've been a nurse at Riverside General Hospital for 8 years. I've seen my share of difficult cases, but nothing prepared me for what occurred during that December blizzard. It started like any other night shift. Well, it was supposed to be routine anyway. The weather forecast had been warning about a massive storm system moving in from the north, and by 4 p.m., the first snowflakes began falling. Within an hour, what started as gentle flurries turned into a full-blown blizzard that practically shut down the entire city. My shift was scheduled to end at 6 a.m., but as the storm intensified, I grew increasingly worried about the drive home. I live about 20 miles out in Millbrook, and the route takes me through some pretty treacherous mountain passes. Under normal conditions, it's already a challenging drive, but with this kind of weather, it would be downright suicidal. What I didn't know at the time was that a section of the main highway had already been closed due to multiple accidents and whiteout conditions. I only found out the next morning when the local news started reporting on it. Maybe it was intuition or just common sense, but something told me to stay put until the storm passed. After handing over my patients to the morning crew, I headed to the staff lounge on the 3rd floor. It's a cramped little space with a worn-out sectional sofa, a coffee table that's seen better days, a row of employee lockers, and a single floor lamp that gives off this sickly yellow glow. The walls are painted that institutional green color you see everywhere in hospitals. The kind that's supposed to be calming but somehow makes everything feel more sterile and cold. I settled onto the couch around 11 p.m. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows with such force that I could feel the vibrations through the walls. Under different circumstances, the rhythmic sound of snow pelting against the glass might have been soothing. Instead, it felt ominous. I dozed on and off for a few hours, never quite falling into deep sleep. The exhaustion from my 12-hour shift was pulling at me, but something kept me on edge, like my subconscious was warning me to stay alert. It was exactly 2:33 a.m. when everything changed. I remember the time because I'd just checked my phone when I felt this overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone anymore. The air in the room seemed to thicken, becoming almost viscous. The temperature, which had been comfortable despite the storm, suddenly plummeted. At first, I thought I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I'd had a couple episodes before, so I recognized the feeling of being unable to move. But this was different. This wasn't just physical immobilization. It felt like something was actively holding me down, pressing against my chest with malevolent intent. That's when I saw it emerge from the shadows near the supply cabinet. It didn't appear all at once, but rather seemed to coalesce from the darkness itself, like smoke taking shape. The thing was vaguely human in form, but wrong in every proportion, too tall, too angular, with limbs that seemed to bend in ways that defied anatomy. But it was the eyes that will haunt me forever. 2 burning points of red light that seemed to bore directly into my soul, radiating nothing but pure, undiluted hatred. I've never felt such concentrated malice directed at me. It was as if this entity despised my very existence, the fact that I was breathing, that I had a heartbeat, that I existed in a physical form when it... didn't. The creature began moving toward me, not walking but gliding across the floor. leaving a trail of absolute darkness in its wake. As it approached, the lamp's feeble light seemed to be swallowed up, as if the thing carried its own personal void. When it reached the couch, I felt the full weight of its malevolence crash down on me. The pressure on my chest became unbearable, each breath a monumental struggle. I was convinced I was going to die there, alone in that little room, a victim of something that science would never be able to explain or even acknowledge. In that moment of absolute terror, something deep inside me stirred. I'm not particularly religious, haven't been to church since I was a kid, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I started reciting the Lord's Prayer in my head, words I hadn't thought about in decades suddenly flowing back from childhood memory. The effect was immediate. The pressure lessened just enough for me to keep going. I moved on to other prayers I half remembered, then started making up my own pleas for protection, begging whatever forces of good might be listening to shield me from this evil presence. The entity's reaction was violent and immediate. It recoiled as if something was physically repelling it, then suddenly lunged forward and passed directly through my body. The sensation was indescribably, like every cell in my body was flash frozen, while simultaneously being burned from the inside out. As it penetrated through me, it let out a shriek of pure rage that seemed to reverberate, not just in the room, but inside my very bones. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone sucked down into the floor, as if the earth itself had swallowed it whole. The air gradually returned to normal. The oppressive weight lifted. Slowly, sensation returned to my limbs. I lay there shaking for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally managed to sit up, I noticed the storm had completely passed. The digital clock on the wall read 3:15 a.m. The entire encounter had lasted less than an hour, but it felt like I'd aged years. I immediately left the lounge and headed straight for the emergency department, where there were people and bright lights and the comforting bustle of medical activity. I needed to be surrounded by life and normalcy. Over the following weeks, I quietly asked around about any unusual incidents in the hospital's history. I talked to some of the older staff members and even did some research online about the building's past, but I found nothing that suggested any previous paranormal activity, just the usual urban legends that seem to follow every hospital around. It's been over a year now, and I still can't rationally explain what happened that night. I've had sleep paralysis before, but this was something entirely different. The sheer malevolence, the physical sensations, the visual details, everything was far too vivid and real to be just a dream or hallucination. One thing's for certain, I've never spent another night alone in that lounge. If I ever have to stay over again, I make sure to camp out in the busy areas where there are always people around. And despite never being particularly religious, I've found myself praying more often than I'd care to admit. That blizzard caused significant damage throughout the region, down power lines, multiple car accidents, a few minor avalanches in the mountain passes. But for me, the real damage went far beyond anything physical. That night fundamentally changed how I view reality and the unseen forces that might be lurking just beyond our perception. Sometimes we cannot explain everything with medicine or science. Perhaps it is better that they remain unexplained, because some truths must be kept hidden.